Sydney here from the committee, and there'll be some other people coming and going. So, Jamie, would you do the karakia, please?
Okay, kia ora tātou, me I moi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora.
Thank you. Have you got some apologies?
Yes, so we've received apologies from Mayor Neil Brown and also from Claire Buchanan.
And Ari.
And Ari.
Yep.
I'll move those apologies be accepted. I say aye. Carried. Any extraordinary business that we know of? Not yet. If anything comes from the floor, that's fine. Register of interest is in the papers. Confirmation of the minutes. So the minutes were circulated. Is there any comment on the minutes? Before we move. Well, I'll move to a true record of the meeting. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Richard. All those in favour? Aye. Aye, carry, that's good. Correspondence, what have we got there?
Is this one working? There we go. No inward correspondence, but we did have the outgoing letters that we agreed to last month, which were letters regarding Lake Camp to Ashburton District Council, Environment Canterbury and Te Runanga o Arowhenua.
And they were circulated to the committee?
Yes.
Yeah. So everyone's received those letters? That's good. Public contribution. So we're into our Lake Camp workshop, Jamie. Do you want to do that off?
Yeah, okay. At the last Zone Committee meeting, there was a Lake Camp presentation or a proposal presented by the Lake Clearwater hut holders. Following on from that meeting, there has been an Ashburton District Council workshop regarding how they want to, or what action they want to take regarding that. And then there was a decision made at the Ashburton District Council meeting. So I'll just invite Councillor Richard Wilson to speak to that.
Good afternoon. I'll first start off. So we had a workshop and we discussed it all, and then we took it to council and we rediscussed it again, and a motion was put and passed. So if I read the motion, that gives you perhaps some of the background to start with. The motion is that council requests an officer's report to understand the costs and implications of applying for a resource consent to divert Balmacan stream into Lake Kemp. And so from that, there was actually a recent news article in the paper which you could have read as well, but the crux of it is that the report will help councillors understand the ramifications of risks of pursuing a consent before making any decision, and that should take about a month. So it's sort of it's a starter for 10 to see all the different things that could be implicated in it, so that then council can then look and go, well, yes, this is the big risks of it, this is the things we can do and can't do. So when that comes out, that'll inform us all a lot more on what it means, not just sort of starting off blindly hoping we can get it with a, because there could be more stumbling blocks. We need to understand what they could be as we go.
Any questions for Richard? Who is it? Just some officers from within ADC that are going to do the report, or?
Yes, it's an internal report.
Internal, yeah. And you thought a month?
About a month, yeah.
So we just need a bit of guidance here. There's probably not much we can do here until we hear from ADC on the report, because I can't think of anything. Chris, have you?
I was just wondering if it's worthwhile to park this conversation. Is it worthwhile to park this and listen to John Moore's presentation? That might give us a bit of extra context before we...
So we invited John Moore, who was a Zone Committee 2014, was it? Retired hydrologist who's got a bit of expertise in this area, and he was at the presentation a couple of weeks ago here at Lake Camp. So I asked him if he'd just do a small paper for us and come and just talk to us a bit about his understanding and if he had any recommendations or discussions. So John, thanks for coming, and can you please come up there, and I think Jamie will come. Has that been circulated? So I think everyone's got, John, everyone's got your report circulated, so they've had a wee read of it. So if you mainly could just highlight the main items and then we'll get into discussion, please.
Phone's on. Perfect.
Right. Well, as Bill's just said, I worked all my working career as a hydrologist. I did an earth science degree at Canterbury University in the late 1950s. And I've worked in the field all over New Zealand, but for a lot of the time here in Canterbury. And I first visited that Ashburton Lakes area about 1960, and I've been going up there mainly to go mountaineering ever since. So I have a reasonable idea, and I can remember times during the 1980s when I was working in South Canterbury Catchment Board based in Timaru. There was a couple of spells where Lake Camp went down to really low levels, and then it recovered again and came up, and sometimes it comes so high that it creates flooding problems, which is the other end of the sort of spectrum of what happens. The first thing I want to say to you, and that's what I said to Bill when he asked me about it, was the first thing you need to remember is Lake Camp's been there for 12,000 years. And the deep part's probably a kettle hole resulting from a block of glacial ice melting at the end of the Ice Age. And any time you have a dry spell of 2 or 3 years, the lake drops down to low levels. And so in 1982 and again in 84, 85, we had droughts in Mid-Kent and South Canterbury. But then that was followed by really wet conditions in 86, 87, which led to flooding. And I'll just show you briefly this graph I've brought in, because it's really quite instructive. What that's graphing is the SOI index. It's from the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, and every time it goes down, you'll have really low lake levels because it's down for a year or two, and there's a record of this information right back to 1900. And so I made a summary of that and put it in as a table. So that's what's actually driving the situation. It's not just accident, it's part of the climate system. And so every time there's an El Nino event, and sometimes they dribble on for several seasons before they finally turn the corner and go back into the other side and produce some more rain. Now, one of the really notable ones is right at the start of World War I. It's 1913, 14, 15, and it was very dry all over New Zealand at that time. And in Hawke's Bay, it's labelled as the Great Drought because the farmers had turned up in the 1870s and 1880s and got their sheep and cattle farms established, and things were actually quite nice at that stage. And then they ran into this 3 years where it just about didn't rain at all. And so it got labelled as the Great Drought, and it's way worse than anything they've had since. So that's the sort of information that we've got. So I've compiled that table of data, and the other thing that's at the back of this set of notes is this climate monitoring graph from the Bureau of Meteorology, and you can see in 2023, it turns a corner at this high point and goes down, and it's then mainly stayed down. So that's the dry spell we're in now. And until it turns a corner and goes back the other way, it'll carry on like that. Now, other things that you should perhaps get your head round is that if you do divert flow from the Balmacan stream into Lake Camp, it would barely balance the evaporation loss from the lake surface, and especially during periods of low flow. So if you get one of these really dry spells, the lake's just going to go down anyway, and it's always done that. And the other thing that happens, of course, is if you remove water that would have flowed down to Lake Roundabout, Lake Emma and the associated wetlands, because that's where the Balmacan stream's water goes to, that there's always an environmental cost to actions which take and divert natural flow. It's not, it's nice to maybe put some water into Lake Camp, but somewhere else in the system pays for it. And you can see at point 3, the lake has currently dropped 3.6 metres from a peak in 2021 through to August this year. And it's my view that there's likely to be an increase in groundwater flows into Lake Camp, because when you lower the lake level, especially that amount, you actually increase the hydraulic gradient in the groundwater system, and so the water there will flow more rapidly down into the lake, which is a beneficial thing. But that again, it's just part of the natural system. Then I just put some facts there about the 30th of May 2021 flood event, because that saw 526 mils of rainfall recorded in 48 hours at Mount Somers. And that's at an automatic rain gauge up on the Burma Road ridge between Woolshed Creek and the Stour River. And I selected that site and installed the gauge in 1987 after the March 86 flood. And the May storm, looking at the other data available, is likely to have dumped 300 millimetres onto Lake Camp, and there would have been runoff from the surrounding catchment area as well. And you can see that in some of the graphs. And so Mount Hutt automatic rain gauge, which is located at Scott Saddle, recorded 311 mils. There was 316 at Blandswood, 310 at Mount Francis, which is just south of the Orari River, and 350 mils at Geraldine. So it's a pretty fair bet that it was at least 300 millimetres at Lake Camp. And it certainly caused the lake to rise rapidly and later to overflow, leading to flooding problems. The next thing I looked at was the ecology of the lake, which is actually quite interesting, because the water clarity data shows high visual clarity, and it's consistently the clearest of all the monitored Ashburton lakes. Secondly, the Lake Camp has macrophyte beds. Those sort of aquatic plants that live completely submerged. And it's interesting because they grow down in the deeper water in a zone above about 11 metres depth. And they're probably growing down below where the water level recedes to in dry spells. And they've been there a long time. And then if you go below those plants, down in the very bottom of the lake, or in the lower slopes of it, there's quite a large population of kakahi, the New Zealand freshwater mussels. And they've done surveys of them, and there's as many as 300 to the square metre, so it's just paved with them. Now, the interesting thing about those two things, the macrophyte beds and the kakahi, is that they're actually organisms that are quite fussy about the conditions they live in, and the fact that they're there suggests that Lake Camp is relatively healthy as a lake. And it has the steadiest parameters of all the Ashburton lakes. It's not perfect, but it's consistently better than most of the other lakes. And Tony Preston from DOC, Geraldine, speaking here a week or so ago, said there's no evidence the water level is worsening the health of the lake, and I would concur with that. So I conclude, after looking at all of that there appears to be no ecological reason to divert water into Lake Camp. The best thing you could do is actually leave it alone and let it operate as a natural system. Now that's probably pretty unpalatable to some people, but you've really got to wonder why you want to put water in the lake, because it's not actually doing anything useful. Part maybe from allowing water skiing to be a bit easier to carry out. But it's not going to stop it fluctuating up and down over metres of range. A possible solution to enable water skiing, jet boating and surf skis might be to negotiate a new set of rules covering the use of Lake Clearwater, which you would have tied to some level on Lake Camp, and if it falls below that level, then these other rules would come into effect. And the sort of thing you could have was a line from the boat ramp out to the island in Lake Clearwater, and east of that could be designated for water skiing, jet boats and jet skis, while west of it would be windsurfing, sailing and canoeing. Now, somebody I was talking to about that said the only hassle with setting up a set of rules like that is you probably need an act of parliament to give effect to it, which would be jolly difficult. I thought it would be easier to set that up than to get a resource consent to divert the Balmacan stream. That solution might be a lot less expensive than obtaining a new resource consent to take and divert water from Balmacan stream and discharge it into Lake Camp. One of the major risks you've got if you're running a diversion like that is that you could end up diverting a flood flow with a lot of heavily sedimented floodwater entering Lake Camp, and ecologically that would be disastrous. Another alternative might be for people to water ski on Lake Hood. And another suggestion that various people have suggested to me is that what might be a good thing to do is actually go ahead and build a concrete boat ramp while the lake's low and you can get at the site. Build a boat ramp right down to make it easier to put boats in and out of Lake Camp, because that would be, wouldn't probably do anything damaging to the lake's sort of mode of operation, but it might facilitate people being able to use the lake for recreational purposes. And finally, I just wanted to note that when I looked yesterday at the Lake Camp has had 2 small rises now and has risen a total of 49 millimetres, which is, not very much. But it has come up, so maybe it's turned the corner. But that's, unless you get a really big downpour, like the 1986 flood or the 2021 flood event, it'll just creep up in small amounts and eventually come quite high. And as you know, there's no really flowing stream going into it, which is why Lake Clearwater is such a different lake. It's got big catchment areas and flowing streams flowing into it, whereas Lake Camp hasn't. And it's got no normal it hasn't got an outlet stream, but my guess is that hollow that runs through the Lake Clearwater hut settlement is probably sitting on top of what used to be a meltwater channel back in the Ice Age, and it'll be full of coarse bouldery gravel and stuff, and so effectively you've got an underground stream flowing down there and into Lake Clearwater, and it's just sealed over and been grassed and had a road put down it and exists. But in major flood events, water actually flows down there on the surface and creates a few hassles. That's all, I think. So, as I've said before, I think the most useful thing you could do is actually do nothing in terms of putting water into the lake. Just leave it to operate as a natural system, because it's been operating like that for 12,000 years and it's clearly a very healthy lake. So why would you want to mess around with it?
Thanks, John. I think we've got a question from Councillor McKenzie.
Does that come on automatically? Don't touch anything. Yeah, thanks, John. Couple of questions. The diversion's been going for 60 odd years, about 60 years. So the natural state is a little bit unknown. In your knowledge of Lake Camp, when did the Balmacan last flow naturally without using the diversion into Lake Camp? Because there are 2 streams that come out of the Balmacan. When you look at the geology, which are clearly where at some stage the river has naturally flown across the fan into Lake Camp in there's two stream beds which actually clearly show that. One is the one that they put the diversion on, and the one is further upstream from the Balmacan, and they clearly, the Balmacan has shifted and presumably a flood of some description further over and stopped flowing into that. Have you got any knowledge of that?
No, but if it did that, it would be during flood events that would do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, clearly, yeah.
And I haven't been able to confirm it, but anecdotally the view was that in one of those events is not long after that they put the diversion in just to hold the level at a more steady lake, because so you acknowledging you'd have your ups and downs, but in fact if you had some flow going into it, and I'd just say that the natural outlet for Lake Camp I think is at the bottom of the lake anyway. It flows into the wetland that flows down to Lake Emma. There's a stream that flows out.
Yes, there is, yes. Yeah, on the surface, yeah.
It actually bypasses in the lake.
Well, it goes into the same wetland that the Balmacan flows
It goes
into.
actually eventually down to the lake outlet, but it doesn't actually flow into that roundabout wetland. You know, where the Gunga Homestead, where the Spider Lakes are, that stream comes out in that vicinity, so it's not part of Lake Emma wetland. So one of the things, if I may just have a moment, is to say that that as far as I know, well, I've been up and down Balmacan many times, and one of my little hobbies is being slightly interested in geology, and it's a very dramatic, dynamic system. It's quite a steep walk if anybody's been up to the saddle, and it was particularly interesting to go up of more recent times following the flood. There's a lot more to come. It's obviously just a very friable shingle, mix of shingle and rocks and interesting rock types and so on, but it's not going to, it's going to be fairly soon when we're having the weather events that we have, that it's going to be repeating it, and it's the same, how vulnerable that site looked, where a little dam had been and a diversion had been to put water in Lake Camp. But the other thing that I don't know, and I can't see, is what actual studies have been done about the ecological values of the river, and it doesn't have to be a large lizard sitting on a rock sunning itself. There are a lot of other aspects to this small, accessible river up to its saddle, and there's not only the ecological values, it's the dynamism of this river. Like when you set up a diversion to go to Lake Camp, that when the money that's going to be spent is going to be huge, because we will be asking for that information with regard to the river for its own value, that it'll always be at risk from another downpour and that huge amount of shingle. So when we've been doing wild or weeding work, where over the wider fan, where it's actually built up, so it's now tending to go lower and around to Mount Position, in fact onto the Mount Position property. There's quite a bank built up there, but you see it is just that rocky conglomerate of a braided river trying to do its thing. So you're going to get that if you're going to try to make a diversion towards Lake Camp. You're still going to have a major shingle problem heading towards Lake Camp. I haven't got a really opinion about whether the lake should be raised or whatever it is, but one of the things is in the bird surveys, probably this year in particular, the people that were working on Lake Heron, for the first time, they didn't have to make their way through wet carricks and very difficult terrain to do the surveys by the Cameron fan. And they probably had several metres out from the edge of the lake was dry for them to walk on. And the same for me. Denny has quite a different sort. Lake Denny has quite a different source of water. It's seeping off the back of Mount Possession. Trinity is another little kettle hole, and it was virtually dry. The kettle holes are at Spider Lakes. Most of them were as dry as I've ever seen them, and one of them was actually dry. So, you know, this is just a moment in time that the lakes were all dry. The ones that weren't have a whole different water supply system, like Clearwater. And I'm afraid I have to just disagree with John with regard to having various sports on Lake Clearwater, because I think it'd be jolly well probably more expensive than making a diversion from Balmacan stream. But I mean, I don't know. Just what would the thought be about increasing the boat ramp? Because that's one of the problems, is they can't get their boats in the water. Some people have.
I've got a question, thank you. A question again, you've got to turn yours off, please. Sydney's got a question. You got a question there, Sydney?
She's actually typed it.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. That was a very nice presentation. I really enjoyed listening about the history about the place, which is really helpful when you have to consider all those options. And it's really good that you have given us so many options to consider. I just wonder if you know what happens when the lake goes really dry or it fluctuates really up, what happens to the microphytes there? Do you have any idea if it dies out and then comes back, or it just maintains as it is?
The fact that there's macrophyte beds there really suggests that the lake doesn't dry up. That's why they've survived. So I think what happens is it'll go down to pretty low levels, but then, and the macrophytes are living below that level, and then when it rains and the lake starts to recover, they might just grow a bit more healthily and better. But the mere fact they're there really suggests that the lake has never dried up in the last 12,000 years.
Yes, John. Ange?
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. My question isn't specific to necessarily just Lake Camp. If we go back to a time when we had our overarching Canterbury Water Management Strategy vision, I'm wondering where we're sitting currently with that vision in context to obviously national policy statements, etc. It talks about the strategy is to gain the greatest cultural, economic, environmental, recreational and social benefits from our water resources within a sustainable framework, both now and for future generations. So when we look at the recreational component of some of the discussions that we're finding ourselves having now, yes, it is water skiing. But there it was scouts, it was camping, it was swimming, it was fishing, it was a lot of different components. We've just had similar discussions in Rakaia Gorge around fishing and that recreational component. So does the CWS vision is it still in play, or has something changed that we're not able to talk about recreational components as confidently? Does anybody know?
Councillor Mackenzie.
Well, I can tell you that certainly recreational values are held dear to most of the councillors, even the Christchurch councillors. So there's no suggestion that they are of lesser value. The only thing that has changed is the hierarchy of Te Manarotoa, where the water quality, the health of the water body now is deemed to be of greater priority from a national direction over human health and then over recreation, economic and other values. But that's not the same as the CWMS. The values in the CWMS haven't changed.
Chris?
Yeah, thanks, John, for your intel on the lay of the land up there. And hopefully it's not a leading question, but never waste a crisis is one of my mottos. And now we've got a very low lake, and it's probably in a time, in a generation where people haven't actually seen it. You've had the benefit of doubt, you've seen, or in hindsight, you've seen all that. What science should we use as an opportunity to understand the lake, given that the Regional Council has given the Ashburton Lakes as one of our priorities, the District Council's given it, the Zone Committee, as a priority. Now we've got a lake that's very low. What science would we do to inform our community that, yes, it is a good idea to look at something, understand the hydrology, understand something else? What would you say that we could be trying to steer the Regional Council or someone in expertise to do a study of while the lake is low?
I think they're actually doing most of the things that you need to. I mean, they've got a recorder on it now because you can flick that up on your computer at home and have a look-see. Admittedly, it's only a short record, but it's a hell of a lot better than no record. So you've got that, and they've clearly done, somebody, DOC or ECAN, have done macrophyte surveys, and they've surveyed the Kakahi, and they regularly do, I think ECAN regularly do water quality measurements in the lake. So all of that stuff's being done. And maybe, it's probably worth maybe to ask ECAN to do a run of their survey while it's as low as it is, because it's always useful to do sampling like that when something's at an extreme. It's the same with big floods.
What about on the Belmachan Creek or stream? Is there any knowledge? Has anyone been doing a history of what the flow's like? There's been water flows taken out of it in the past. Has it been at high flows, low flows, or has it just been a really scientific wild ass guess sort of to what they should have taken?
They obviously, from what I've read, had some rules about how much they could take, because when it got down to really low flows, probably just before it would stop flowing, then they cut back the amount they were taking. So they had some sort of rules, and there are also spot gaugings where they've gone in and just measured the flow and presumably found got a main stream where it was all in one channel and then measured it. But they're pretty small flows a lot of the time. I mean, obviously in that flood event they weren't. It would have been a raging torrent.
But even if the council or someone was looking at trying to take some water, do you think that would be a prerequisite to know the volume of water that is actually coming down? Is it going to even offset any of the evaporation? Yeah. Actually getting a quantum to start with over a reasonable time?
Yeah. There'd be all sorts of gaps in the information you had, that's for sure, and there'd be much more of them on the Belmachan stream than on Lake Camp. And I just know because I've done similar work on Lake Coleridge for the hydropower consents, which I dealt with a couple of decades ago now. But they started diverting small flows into Lake Coleridge in the early days, thinking it would top the lake up, and it really didn't, because as soon as they ran Coleridge Power Station, the lake went down to the intake level and stopped. And to their surprise, it didn't fill up, and it wasn't until they did the Harper diversion, and then much later in the 70s, the Wilberforce diversion, and actually diverted cumecs of water into the lake that they could actually manipulate its levels. And if you worked through the data available, it was very clear that the small diversions barely balanced the evaporation off that lake surface. And the same would apply on Camp and Clearwater. There's actually a surprising amount of water. If it's there, it'll evaporate, basically, and especially if you've got a nice, hot, dry nor'wester.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks, John. It's good to have a bit of history, and I think, Richard, you might take this paper, maybe give it, if you don't mind, John, to the people that are going to do some work for the council, just to give them a bit of background. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's great. Also, just following up on Angela's point, in the new Canterbury Regional Policy, recreation of the lakes is one of their shared and recognised attributes, and it is noted in there that they're very popular lakes, are very popular recreational areas and everything. And while we're trying to get the balance right, and we're doing this because the community came to the zone committee and asked, can we look at what's happening? Because there's a whole Hutholes community, as you're well aware, that do Lake Camp and Clearwater and the council are now looking into it. So I think, thanks for that background. We'll just wait and see what happens, but it's no easy solution, is it? And just a good rain will be helpful, probably. So thank you, John, very much for coming.
Yeah, it's not just a single, in May 2021 it was a single big dollop, but what will happen is this climate control stuff will turn the corner, and they'll just get consistently wetter conditions over 3 or 4 or 5 years, and that's what lifts the lake. You know, it's a long-term climate thing basically, and if you could almost think of Lake Camp as being like a rain gauge, and if there's low amounts of rain, then the gauge is just about empty, but doesn't actually go empty. And it's lucky that it's 18 metres deep, because otherwise it might. But you know, it's quite a big volume of water there, and that's partly what keeps it healthy.
Oh, thank you for your insight. It's
Right.
much appreciated. So the next item is the HH Wet, is that right?
Yes, but you might want to receive the updates for Lake Camp.
Oh, do we need to do that? Okay, well, I'll just move that we receive John Wall's report. Do I have a seconder for that? Chris? All those in favour? Aye, aye. I see, Brent, you're ready to go. That's good. So we're now going to hear your progress and update report, and welcome you, Fleur, along. It's great to see you. So
Kia ora, through the chair, I'd just like to say thank you very much for having us present to you today. I think you all know Brett, I think he's come here a lot, but a few of you might know myself, and I'm Fleur Thompson, so I'm one of the trustees. I'm a community representative on HH Wet, and I've been fortunate to hold that position for about 18 months. So it's great to be here and really interesting to hear what else the district was talking about.
Thank you, Fleur, and yes, thank you for inviting me back. I've written this paper more like a meeting paper in pictures, so it's got a lot more words in it than a normal presentation, and I wrote it this way given that although 60 minutes sounds long, we're on 7 years of learning here, and some quite challenging and interesting subjects, and so I don't think we can go into depth even in an hour on all of those. So what I'm hoping is that you've had a chance to read the paper, and I'm hoping therefore that we can skim over things that are not new to you or less interesting to you, and that will give us more time to pause and have a discuss things that are more interesting to you. Is that okay?
that'll be good, Brent. It's quite a good paper. There's a lot to take in. But if you highlight the bits that you want to, and we'll pick it up from there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to assume you all are still well aware of PC2 on the left. I'm going to assume you still recall what the Trust's objectives are, essentially, which are summarised on the right-hand side. And I'll move on unless you stop me on the way, and I'll keep an eye on the screen too. I'll assume these questions all make sense, and that we can answer them together, hopefully, as we go through. See if you can keep up with me, Jamie. I think you've seen this one before, and so this is, I guess, a pictorial summary of our key messaging and our key learnings over the last 7 years, in that there are many different parts to the catchment ecosystems, the different water systems, the different human interactions with the water systems, and they all need some work. And fixing one of them and not giving due attention to another one or the rest of them is not going to fix the system. We will have a partial fix, but it actually won't fix the whole system. And so we've got all of the on-farm improvements, which we now have some evidence to show seem to be on track, which is very good news. We've got top and middle catchment enhancements. We've got lower catchment enhancements, and then we've got the wider subject of the water quantity part. How much water is taken from the system, where it's taken from, whether that's being used efficiently, and the like. And sitting at the bottom of the graph, the more we learn about the system, the more we can see the historical effects that are hanging around in the system. And so this local funding, which is going into the trust and into all the other initiatives, is funding fixing the past, making the most of what we can in the present, but also setting ourselves up for the future. That's three really big tasks in one. So we take our hats off to all of those who are contributing in this catchment. It's a privilege to be part of. This summary is, I guess, for those that might not like the complicated looking graphs later on and just want a few words, and maybe want to have a snooze after we get through this slide. So this is our attempt to put 7 or 8 years of learnings into a few words. And for me, really, the top bullet is the most important one. I think at different times in Canterbury, we have focused on one of these three things more than the other. And at the beginning of the water management strategy, it was all about drought, and so the focus was on quantity. By stage 3 of the strategic water studies, quality was introduced. And it was realised that if we sort out the quantity problem, we would then have potentially more of a quality problem, which was right. The habitat question, which sort of fits in biodiversity and the other parts of ecosystem health, is normally sat along to the side, and I guess echoing Angie's point about recreation. Sometimes it's been perhaps a bit of a poor cousin to the others, but if you don't have habitat in the right place for key ecosystems, for example, the freshwater mussels down the bottom of Lake Camp, they're not going to survive. You can have sufficient water quality and quantity, but if you don't have somewhere for fish to lay their eggs, they're probably not going to do very well. And so that's been one of our learnings, is that as we now have more and more data, even though it's more complicated to look at it all together, it's really important to look at it all together. Hopefully, the rest of the bullets are reasonably self-explanatory, and if they're not, hopefully when we get to talk about them piece by piece, that they will make a little bit more sense. Is there any reason to pause before we jump in? No?
No, we're ready to go.
Thank you. This wasn't mentioned in the summary, and this is public information for just about the first time. It actually was on our Facebook a little while ago because there were some questions raised about the targeted rating, which funds us. So this is the second update since PC2. Those of you that have been around a while will recall that MRB did the economic analysis for Plan Change 2. And so this is the second go at updating it. A lot has changed in the last 10 years. Available options on the farm, for example, but also our catchment-wide learnings, and obviously the economic situation locally and regionally has gone through quite a few shifts. These numbers are all worse / more challenging than the last update that we had 3 to 4 years ago. Now, actually was based on 2018 data. In other words, the costs, both locally or on farm and regionally, and therefore nationally, of not doing all the pieces of the puzzle here for Hinds Plains. In other words, just focusing on one part of the solution and not the rest of the solution. The costs of not doing that have gone up. And so the loss in land value is, I think it's about $23,000 on average per hectare to get to that 2.2 billion. These figures of over $100 million per year on farm and over $350 million per year for the region. If we go back to the per farm on the Hinds Plains, it's not all that many farms that we're talking about. So if you divide that by the number of farms, you get a reasonably scary number as well. So this is yet another incentive, I guess, for us to carry on and do the best we can with every dollar. Does any questions or comments on that before we move on?
Yeah,
Chris?
Can you repeat, what was that number per hectare that it was worth?
About, so $2.2 billion over the Heke Hinds catchments, about $20,000 to $23,000 per hectare drop on average. So obviously the higher value, more intense land with the higher current values, that would drop more, and the lower intensity, therefore lower dollar per hectare land, would drop less. But on average, about 23,000. So it's not insignificant.
And I think it's worth understanding what those numbers mean, because those numbers are more specific about farming business owners, but the implications for Ashburton means you lose East Street, you lose West Street, you lose all the big box retailers, you lose the sports centre, you lose the schools, and you lose the hospital. That's the implications of what this is talking about, because it's actually shutting down effectively all economic activity, and that drives social and cultural activity in the county.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move away from the glass half empty to the glass half full, or perhaps more than half full. We've been looking forward to seeing this information for quite some time, because it's come from not just the schemes but also the individual farmers as well. We've been doing our bit to track towards the 2035 targets. There's a requirement in the rules, the Land and Water Regional Plan rules for Managed for Recharge, that the on-farm improvements are happening as well in parallel. And so it's been really pleasing to see this information come through. Some of this has come through the MRB report, but the remainder has come through from individual submissions and reports to us. Any comments or questions? Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, no, just looking up the management intensive winter grazing plans, catch crops, plantain, reduced stocking rates, minimal tillage. Am I jumping too far ahead, or is it
No, go for it.
The plantain, there's been some recent information about that, and using just sort of Italian pastures, and could be chicory or whatever. Are you limiting yourself? Were you opening your horizons to say there's more than just the plantain as an option? The science is changing. I'm just wondering how you're challenging yourself on that.
Great question, thank you. So this is just reporting back from what the schemes and landowners have told us they're already doing. Through the Heke Hinds Science Collaboration, we have a broader remit to try and understand what's best and what's going on. Ashley Dean was the first farm I worked on as a kid, and so the work that they're still doing there now is relevant to down here as well. And so through, which is probably the next slide, through these other initiatives, through the catchment groups and through the Science Collaboration Group, we are seeking to bring in as we can to play our part, if you like, in assisting these. So there's no intent to limit to plantain. It was just trying to fit how many landowner submissions did we receive in total? 70, around about 70, into one page. So there were a lot more words that came in than have gone out. All right. Moving on for now. So just touched on these community initiatives. What is going on here collectively is quite amazing, quite unique. The ground swell, the busy people getting together and co-learning and taking collective responsibility and going out and monitoring and learning about controlling magpies, Chris, and and the like. I mean, yeah, this is unparalleled. This level of effort going on here. So again, take my hat off to you all for what's going on here. I do want to just note there is a name there you will recognise, Sidene, one of our researchers, and she has done some really fine work. She has really helped us to understand the different sources of the water and the way that those different sources move throughout the catchment and mix in the water monitoring, which helps us to understand where the water is moving, where it's coming from, and also what potential enhancements, both on farm and other, that we could do. I would encourage the committee to, if you haven't already, invite Sydney to present her findings to you at some point in time. They are in marking. Hopefully, Sydney, we will be raising a glass to you very soon when it comes out of the marking end, and it will be all public, and you can come and talk about it. Yes, it was something coming up from online. Good. Any other comments or questions? Angela.
If I may, through the chair. As I'm watching this, and with that particular slide up there, so I know through emails from Jamie, there's a report coming from ECAN. I think it's to do with Plan Change 2. It's kind of pending and gets a little bit delayed. It's been delayed. And what I'm wondering is ECAN are obviously doing their role in PC2, and the community, if you look at that slide, is doing quite a bit of the implementation and different things, no doubt from the Hinds Drains Working Party recommendations and other places. What's the interface between the two, and how do we inform each other as we travel through? So we don't want to get to da-da, we're at the end and there's a whole bunch of surprises we've got to unwrap. So I'm just kind of wondering where this, as we're listening to it, this is great, but where does this fit in with what's happening up the road at Chewham Street, for example?
I guess we're all waiting to hear what's coming out of Chewham Street.
I don't know if Jamie, we'll wait because the report was meant to be here 3 months ago. So it's obviously going to be quite a serious piece of paper, but my understanding is that Plan Change 2 had consequences that have to be followed, and that'll be nitrogen loss, water, all those things. So they'll be measuring. So this report here will all be very useful because it's proving the plan that have been put in place is working. How he can judge that, I don't know, but there will be things coming out of there that won't be.
Sorry, they've got access to what you're showing here that's been made available?
So this presentation has obviously been made available to council through the Zone Committee, and our annual reports are up on our website, so are available publicly as well. So the answer is yes, I hope, and if there's something else we can do, we'll do it. Obviously, the information I'm showing today, this new information, is sitting in the current annual report, which is in an early draft state. You're getting the advanced short version, not the full long version. So no one's had a chance to see that because I haven't finished writing it.
What's the balance date? Is it in June 30th, is it?
So we have a May 31 end to our operational year, but then there's the June 30 end to the hydrologic year.
I see.
And so report kind of sits in between those two. So it's mostly June to May, but it includes a little bit of June information normally.
Ian, have you got
Well, I was just going to comment really on Angie's comments. First is, I don't think the continuous improvement ever ends. So there is no end to this process, I don't think. Secondly, what the Trust is trying to do is implement a catchment-wide intervention to try to sort out some of the issues created by the farming systems in the Hinds Plains. And when this project started, we were in partnership, the Trust was in partnership with the Regional Council and the District Council and, to a degree, central government. The Regional Council doesn't feel much like a partner anymore because of the trouble that Brett and his team have had with trying to get the consents through. So, and PC2 foreshadowed the effects of managed aquifer recharge and targeted stream augmentation and all the things that Brett's team are trying to achieve. But until the project can get its consents in place and then move ahead, being able to achieve the PC2 targets is not going to happen. And that's what the economic report and everything else is talking about. While this project is stalled, progress towards achieving the environmental outcomes and other outcomes sought in PC2 are not going to be achieved.
If I could just quickly give a little bit more context, because in my mind, I know we've got a zone review happening and they're also reviewing the HH wet, the role of catchment groups, everything under the bigger question of what does local freshwater leadership look like, going forward. And I think there's a workshop coming up. There was a date, which I think was going to happen this week. It's been postponed and delayed. But we get an opportunity to be in the room as part of that discussion. So this is giving some good context in what good local leader, I know what it looks like from the role that I play, and I am hearing from there. So some of this information would be really helpful to have in the room when those workshops are taking place. So that's more where I'm coming from when I ask it, as long as there's a line of sight. So thank you, carry on, sorry.
No, all good. All right, so first of a few graphs. You've seen the earlier version of this, those of you that were here last time. And so the brief history of this is that prior to PC2, there was not a lot of coverage of the plains in terms of groundwater nitrate monitoring, and so the knowledge 10 years ago was based on the information that collectively was held. Then to monitor progress towards the objectives, which the catchment which were set for PC2, there needed to be some representative monitoring bores determined. And of course at that time it was hard to know, because of the history of monitoring, what would be required. And so collectively we are learning. There has been the set of between sort of 10 and 13 official shallow bores that have given us a very good data set over the last 10 years, and I'll get to the annuals in the next slide. In the last 6 or 7 years, beginning by MHV Water, there has been a much more intensive water sampling program going on. Now this costs a lot more money, takes a lot more time, and so the question that this data set is now posing is, what is the appropriate size of data set across the Hinds Plains to one, not waste money, but two, have confidence that the metrics, and that's the median, coming out of that are representative of the water quality in the catchment. And so this is an ongoing conversation with Environment Canterbury staff and with the community. And so you may see the PC2 data set is included in the larger data set. So they're not different data sets. One is a larger version of the same thing. And so when I came here last time, we had just gone after the sort of the after effects of the September 21 effect, and you could see the smaller data set was moving around a lot because there were different lag time effects on different bores, whereas the larger data set has shown overall much less swing of change. So if we go back to the 21 event, from about 9 up to about 10.5, and so much less movement in the nitrate compared with the smaller data set. So we're just going to, we're suggesting that we carry on doing this more intensive data set, this more intensive monitoring at the same time, and see how they track. And this annual graph, you will see the last 4 years have got the dark blue one, so the dark blue annual medians are the larger data set, and the lighter blue are the smaller data set. The orange line going through the middle is rainfall, with the dotted line over the 2021-22 years, because the rainfall fell right at the changeover of one year to the other, and so there were no water quality effects in the year it would have been sitting in. So we are very confident in our knowledge of this catchment, in that the larger rainfall events drive nutrient movement through. They drive water through the catchment and nutrients through the catchment. So you see lower levels of nitrate in the groundwater during dry periods, which is more of a base flow, and you see these larger flushes going through the system. And now we're seeing some of the complexities of those flushings, where it can be up to 2 years before some bores respond, some wells respond to these large recharge events. And so we can be seeing the consequences of the rainfall for up to 2 years in the well readings of nitrate.
Yes, Scott.
Yes.
I'm just looking at the first two graphs, and I see you made a comment. You said it costs a lot of money and time. Whose money and time is it costing to do this?
Yours. And
So when I say yours, I mean, is it the councils or is it the people that live in that area? So who's paying for it?
so the PC2 bores are funded from the regional rating. The rest of the bores are funded by the locals, and so we're talking MHV shareholders, BCI shareholders, and all landowners through HH Wet.
I'm reasonably simple when it comes to science, but I would have thought that if you had a bigger subset of, numbers of graphs, you would use that because that's a more reliable data set than the smaller set. So is it, why is it set in place that we're using 10 to 13 rather than 80?
As I said, back when going back to 2013-14, when PC2 was created, there was not a lot of data around. There weren't that many bores that were being regularly monitored, so we didn't have a good long data set. You're right, Richard, in that a larger data set should, as long as it's not sort of clustered around certain points and missing out key areas, if it's if it covers the whole area, which this one does, it's good. We also need a long data set though, and so that's why 4 years is not going to give us a trend. The dotted line that you'll see, that's a 5-year moving average. And so by having this data set over 18 years now, even though it's a smaller data set, it does show that increasing trend that we saw for the first 8 or 9 years of it, appears to have been pulled back. That whatever data set you look at, that those rises that we were seeing have been held, and it's now going acrosswards. The small data set can't give you that information, can't give you that trend because it's too small. But the smaller data set does tell us that in the difference between the dry and the wet years is actually not that much, whereas the small data set says it's going up and down a lot more.
And that is part of my discussions with the science team at ECAN, is to accept the information that's coming from the wider data set provided by MHV.
I think that's a key element, the owner of the data. So the PC2 is ECAN data owned by data. The MHV is actually owned by, the landowners, and so there's different ownership there. But hopefully over time they'll be used.
Probably just to clarify that, so, the data is the data, effectively, and if you own a set of data that's not right or is skewed, I would have thought any scientist worth his cramps would want the data that's the highest scientific value, so that's what we should be pushing forward, is that right?
Yes, so the challenge specifically is that the landowners who signed up to the MHV data set signed up confidentiality agreement that data wouldn't be shared without their written approval. And so in order for this data to be useful, it is in its second independent peer review. So for a combined project with Environment Canterbury back, 2 years ago, probably, there was an independent consultant who signed non-disclosure agreement, and they conducted a peer review of this larger data set to give confidence to both parties that it was being collected and stored appropriately. We are now undergoing, now that we're further down the track, we have a second independent peer review by another consultant, and the individual who's doing it happens to be a former member of the Environment Canterbury groundwater science team. So that was very fortuitous that this person, known to many of you, Nicole did her PhD on the Eiffelton irrigation scheme, is undertaking this peer review because she's able to undertake it with both her former ECAN hat on and her current hat on behalf. So we're confident that over time that this method will at least give a level of professional confidence that data is being collected properly. The long-term goal would be that this data become public. But there's a process to work through for that. Does that answer your questions, Richard? Marvellous. Moving on. Sorry, Chris. Not moving on.
Data is great when you look at it by itself, but there's some really important points you raised there. There's about wet seasons, about changes of irrigation practice happen, change from surface or border diking to whatever. That's the context. And I look at a report, something like that, and think, geez, that tells me a really good story. Or, hey, well, you need to do a whole lot more. But actually, it doesn't highlight there's been some really significant changes in practices. Positive.
Yes.
To give that context to someone, otherwise they'll just think, oh, no, we've got to do more, It's not being sort of met. But that context is critical. And I just thought, is there a way in the report that you do highlight that back in the early 2000s there was a change from irrigation practice, the surface flows, trying to get the water balance right is one part of it.
Yes.
And I was just sort of wondering, is that helpful if you can do more of that? Tells a richer story for everyone, I think.
Thank you, Chris. So the reason I highlighted the first summary point was precisely for that reason, because my understanding of this catchment is that the time when the lowland waterways were at their best had a combination of lower intensity land use and much higher levels of unmanaged aquifer recharge through both irrigation practices, including border dike, but also a greater number of leaky races or a greater length of leaky races in the district. In other words, no pipe schemes and more stockwater races. And there was direct discharge between, for example, a stockwater system and a lowland waterway system as well, and the Hiko Hines River and the Ashburton River, actually. There were direct discharges as well. So the water quantity situation was very different then, and the water quality situation was also different then. The habitat situation, I'm not so sure of. It sounds like it probably wasn't that much different to now, but because the water quantity was so high, therefore the habitat became less of a challenge, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to try and write in our report, I'm going to get the right words, is that, looking towards the future, where we are seeking to be more efficient and effective and respectful of our use of water, particularly moving water around, where every drop is more precious, where we are bringing down our nutrient levels, but the community has a desire for these healthy ecosystems that they can go out and recreate in and catch food in and things like that. What is that new combination? What does it look like? And the point that I made earlier, which I will make in this report, is that all three legs of the stool are required for that stool to be able to be sat on. In other words, for the healthy ecosystem. And in our previous reports, we've been more focusing on the pieces of the puzzle rather than showing that picture, if that makes sense. So I will send you a copy of the report when it gets done and reviewed, and I'll look forward to your feedback.
Now, it's probably something I alluded to at our last meeting right at the very end. It's about where do you go to for the source of the truth. And if it wasn't in the Ashburton Guardian, it never happened, sort of thing, going back into the 1900s or way back to the last century. So it's how do you put that stuff in the report so it is recorded, that you know consciously that on these certain dates, and then someone can pick up the report and it's actually very useful in 20 or 30 years' time and saying, actually, by the way, this is actually what was going on, and this is the lag that we've worked out that we've got in improvements or response. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Brett,
So-
is there a coalition between nitrates per litre, mg per litre, as against nitrates per kg to the hectare?
In terms of the fertiliser use and
Yeah.
what we see,
Yeah.
well, yes, you will be able to find that. Is there a correlation? No, because the rainfall will dominate that effects. So, so let's say, for example, it's a dry season and the fertiliser goes on and it sits in the soil and there isn't enough water to grow the crop. It will stay there, and then all of a sudden you get a big rain event, and that legacy nitrogen, if you like, gets flushed through, the system. If that doesn't come, and I was just having a look, when John was referring to the World War I, the early World War I time, it was 5 years of extreme SOI at the time, which is the longest in our history. There is a photo of a horse and dray under the Waimakariri Gorge Bridge. The Waimakariri River was dry during that period. It's the only photo I've ever seen, Chris, this goes back to the history, it's the only photo I've ever seen of our Alpine River, one of our Alpine rivers being dry like that. But it did happen as well. So, yes, so as I note up here, rainfall, land use management and MAR, and I put it in that order. Rainfall does absolutely drive this system. Yes.
Do you want to end?
Just briefly, I was just going to say is part of the analysis we've seen on the trust is if you break out with the MHV data, you break out the dry years, you break out the wet years, you then look at the trends, and so there's the longer the data set, the more sophistication you can put into the analysis, which is what you're talking about, is what are the messages you can pull out of this. And one of the messages is that it looks like the peaks in nitrates tend not to be as high as they were 5 or 6 years ago. But the
Yes.
longer your data set, the more accurate those trends start to look. So
Yep. Online? Question? Sydney? 5-year moving average. All data PC2 and MHV. Thanks, Sydney. So the 5-year moving average is just on the PC2 data. So you'll see it starts in year 5. And so it's an average of the current year and the 4 years before that. And so that's what you get in year 5. Then in year 6, you go from years 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, I have got it right. In year 6, you go from years 2 to 6. In year 7, you go from years 3 to 7. And it's the average. Does that answer your question? Yes. Awesome. Thank you. You're very quiet today, Sydney.
I've got it.
You don't want to know what I am.
I know you are.
We know you're there, Sydney. Carry on, Brett.
All right. So, as Ian was just talking about before, our piece of the puzzle, as determined in Plan Change 2, at the time with the information available, and I was involved in the calculations, it was thought that with as far as on-farm could go, that there would be a lot of additional water required to bring up the ecosystem health. And that number, the maximum of what was called managed aquifer recharge, which actually covered a variety of enhancements, was thought to be a maximum of 6 cubic metres a second of water. That's a lot of water, and an average of 3.8 cubic metres a second. And it was always going to have to come from somewhere, and really the only somewhere that it could come from was the closest alpine river. And so we have been highly cognizant of the importance of maximising the effectiveness of every drop of water that is taken from one water body and used to support another water body. And so where we have got to with our analysis to date is that we think that same job can be done with much less water. And so the 6 QMax max going down to 3.7 max, and the average of 3.8 going down to an average of 2.4. It would be lovely to be able to go further. And when all of the lagged legacy nutrients are worked through the system, and when the current on-farm practices are what we are seeing in the groundwater, that could go down even further. And it's very easy not to take water, and the cost of pulling out one of the MAR sites is not that great. So, and it's being paid for by the locals. And so if the job's being done, then there's no reason to take the water. So that's where we're at. As Ian has mentioned, we are nearly 2 years since lodgement of consents, and so we are behind in getting up to speed and being able to get the sites in the ground, get the water in the ground, and then to measure the results and see if our calculations are accurate or not. And the clock is ticking on 2035, and it's really important that we can get this underway as soon as possible, so that we can play our part. So you've seen this map before, I think. We've sort of divided it into the on-plains area, which is managed aquifer recharge, the area around the Hikio Hines River above State Highway 1, which is primarily near river recharge, although some of them are actually managed aquifer recharge sites because they're just away from the floodplain of the river. And then in the lower half of the catchment, the area that used to be the so-called swamp lands, there are smaller footprint, more intense versions of the old wetland type system with constructed wetlands and bioreactors. And then there is the targeted stream augmentation, which Eiffleton Irrigation have shown us works for some time, and we'll give you an update on that in a moment. All right. Yes. Okay.
Could I just have a quick?
Yeah.
Quick.
Sorry.
You mentioned before the Timor plume. Will this affect the Timor plume or help to?
Can we get to that bit? So that's a wonderful question that has been on my mind for a long time. Yes, and I want to show you some pretty graphs and talk about that in a moment, if that's all right. This one you've seen before many times. We've shown it since 2016. So this is our first managed aquifer recharge site. The bore is about 1 kilometre down gradient, and the data continues to show that when we're turned on, the nitrate levels reduce and get to very low levels, and you'll see it's dipped below 1 milligram a litre in the last 14-15 months. When the site is turned off for a while, particularly due to rain events or also winter maintenance for the MHV infrastructure that delivers it, the nitrate levels go back up, but they don't go up as high as the surrounding nitrate levels. So to the east of this site, they are above the drinking water limit, in some cases well above, and to the west of the site they're just below the drinking water limit, but a lot higher than this. Just want to point out the writing in the top right-hand corner. We are really looking forward to planting the site up in just over a month. You are all invited. We'll be showcasing, so Ashburton District Council have kindly given us the opportunity to re-batter and to plant out the water race that flows through the site to show that the learnings from other districts can be applied here, and that with a few years' growth of calyxes and things, they can shade out macrophytes and the fish. And whoops, there shouldn't be fish in there, should there? We saw them though. The life in those waterways can be supported. We also will have down here a new mechanical planter. So for those of you into mass native planting, there's a mechanical planting machine now that Brailsfords have. And so what on the left, which was Mount Mar, is now flat, and that will be planted through by the mechanical harvester. So you're all invited. We'll put some invites out soon.
Is that site still operating, or is it held up?
This site is operating. No, this has its own consent, so this is continuing to operate. Shall I move on? You've seen that one before. I brought this to the Zone Committee a year ago as a second case study. This was a site further up the plains that we did not expect to be able to find the nitrate response because we know generally where the groundwater should be moving, but we don't know exactly. And we weren't expecting to see such a dramatic response down deep, so deeper than 100 metres. We were expecting it to take the water to take a little bit longer to get down that deep. It appears, with another year's worth of data, that the blue bore, the bore in blue, is directly downgradient from the Mar site, and has been influenced, is still influenced by that water, even though we turned off the site more than a year ago. So we would expect by late this year the nitrate levels on the blue line to start heading back up towards the black line if we don't turn back on again, if that makes sense. So we're waiting to see on that one. You will have seen this photograph before. This is one of the examples, I guess, of taking the holistic water quantity plus quality plus habitat approach to the Hiko Hines Plains. So from the left we have Dock Covenant for lizards, we have a native fish wetland, we have a Totara-based forest in the dry area. Over from that we have a Kahikatea-based forest. By the lizards we have lizard food, berries and things like that they like. And the one on the far right is a much moist area that we planted with Rabobank, and that's much more carex and more moist loving. And so this is about understanding the different habitats and enhancing them. And then this river system needed a castle keep. It needed that bottom 5 metres in Lake Camp, which stays wet so the macrophytes could grow in the dry times and keeps the freshwater mussels alive, so that when the rains come and the lake fills back up again, we're good. And I will show you why this has been successful. And in particular, wanting to acknowledge the Zone Committee and your funding last year. It's critical that plants are maintained properly until they're old enough to survive by themselves. You know, we don't send our children out the door and say, see you in 5 years when you've grown up, you know. they need to be looked after. And these plants have been looked after really well, and they are flourishing. That totara in the front, I actually took a picture of it last week, and it's just taken off. It's really going for it. It's sick of the flaxes dominating it, and it's trying to poke its head up as well. So thank you for the funding. Right, so in terms of evidence basis, so this was my second question that I posed at the beginning. What's the evidence? The evidence for this site was black and white last summer. It was dry. The upper stretch of this river went dry from probably mid-November and wouldn't have wetted up again for many, many months. It's many kilometres of tributaries that would have been completely dry, complete loss of fish. If we're lucky, there would have been some survival and little springs and seeps up the top that might eventually have made their way back down again, but it could have taken a long time. Instead, we had this beautifully flowing stretch of river. It was about 1.5 to 2 k's long until it went underground and up again through Silver Stream, which also stayed alive, which was helpful through this dry spell. Rather than doing the 30-metre electric fishing, which had been done, Mark Webb, on his final field trip before retirement, wanted to come up here, so I joined him. So we did a 500-metre stretch of this river, and it was absolutely teeming. So not just with the natives, but with an adult and a 1 or 2 year old trout. The adult trout had large eel bite marks on its face. They looked reasonably fresh, so that suggested that there was a tuna hanging up there as well. There's some nice holes that have developed. The river has actually braided at this point for the first time since any of the locals had seen it braid because of the consistent flow that it has. And so that's black and white. That's life or death. Obviously that water helps further down the river system as well with life, but now we have fish populations that, as it's got wetter again, have been able to move around as they should be able to. And if you prefer to see it on a chart, then we only have two points before we started, or just after we started, but before the spawning and after. So again, it's pretty black and white. These are just the 30-metre stretches without much overhanging habitat or the pools, which is why they don't pick up the trout and eels in them. They're a bit further up the river. Okay, so these are 2 or 3 graphs. We tried something a little bit different, trying to put together the water quantity and the water quality and the habitat in one place, so that we can ask those questions about what does good look like now. What are we actually aiming for? So I'll try and talk you through it, and we'll see if it makes sense. Obviously, one of the targets is water quality, and we are expressing that as nitrate, nitrogen, so that is the blue line. We're trying to get the blue line under the dotted blue line for 95% of the time. It does go historically below the blue line at times for short-ish periods of time, and then when we have a rain event, it generally goes up and then it comes down again. So we will always have these flushes through. We want the peaks of the flushes, so the peaks of the blue, to be less and less over time, and we don't want the blue to stay up above the line for a long period of time, because that would give us problems. And so if we look where the on-farm improvements and then the near river recharge in Mar started, sort of the before and after, so it's sort of left hand versus right hand of the graph, what we can see is some longer periods below the blue line. So this was the summer of 2021. And when we do have the higher flushing events now, we're seeing the nitrate levels tail off. In other words, decrease more quickly than we had in the past. And we have, as Ian mentioned before, we have done some year-on-year comparisons, so similar rainfall to similar rainfall, and that shows that the nitrate concentrations recently versus in the past are better. However, as I noted earlier on, sometimes it is taking more than a year for all the results of a high rainfall year to show up, so that's not a black and white comparison. So that's the nitrate. If we go to the black...
Sorry, Brent,
yes.
just quickly, 2011, your first graph, 06, 2011, June 2011.
Yes.
What was significant about that year?
It was dry-ish, but not super dry.
Was that when ECAN started doing the testing, getting ready to do PC2?
That is, I think so.
Yep.
Yes, I think so.
So they used that as their base year.
They used 2 years as a base year, a wet year and a dry year. And they started the plan process around then, so it was a very small snapshot in time.
Okay.
Yes, correct. So the black is your quantity, that's your water flow. Across on the right, if you're interested, it's log scale so that we can see the big flows and the small flows. So the number 1 cubic in a river like this would be kind of nice, you know, one in that 1 to 10 range. Obviously the 221 wasn't great. But if we go along and we look at 2014, 15 and 15, 16, that's sitting at 100 litres a second or less. So if we look above that to the blue, we see that these 2 periods of low nitrate, which is good, was at the same time as 2 periods of very, very low water flow. So if I was a small fish in the Lower Hines River, I'd probably hide under one of those pools under the willows and hope I could last. If I was a larger fish, it would probably be curtains.
Quite clever you measured nitrates in a bone-dry river, because in fact the Hines at the mouth was bone-dry for 2 of those years.
Correct. And so what I suspect happened, and we'll see this when we get to the Parakanoi, is that I've joined the dots to make it look a little bit clearer, and there will probably be some missing dots there when there was no nitrate able to be recorded.
Well, the
Yes.
Hines never goes dry at the mouth, but it goes dry in between.
It was dry there a couple of years.
There's always been a little bit of water. It just goes underground for Poplar Road. There's always a little bit of water. There's a wee bit around that flex bit in the corner. You got to look very hard.
Local knowledge. All right. So the third piece of the equation, which is really important, and we've got one measure of this, a common measure of this now is called QMCO, which is quantitative measure of the macroinvertebrates. So this is, essentially what the bugs and the fish need to eat. And so again, if you've got water quantity and quality, but you don't have life around there, you don't have food, it's going to be hard going. You're going to go looking somewhere else. So what we're trying to do here is exceed. We're trying to get the green crosses, X's above the green line. And so you can see, apart from that 2016-17 period, the Highlands River, from a macroinvertebrate perspective, is not doing too bad, and has been doing okay for a while. But again, if we go back to this 2014-15 and 15-16 period, to get those macroinvertebrates, they were probably looking in a pool of water rather than a flowing stretch of water, the scientists. And so although the population might have been quite good in that pool of water, there won't have been many of them, and they won't have been connected to other parts of the river. And so although you get a good looking number there, it is a good looking number, when you look at the whole picture, it still looks to be quite challenging for ecosystem health. If we compare that, and there are comparisons between the 2015-16 and the 2020-21 years in terms of the flows above and the rainfall, what we can see is that the nitrates went down again, which is really good. The QMCI was not quite so good, but the flow was higher. And in fact, the average flow was more than double. And so although 200 litres a second still not ideal, it's much better than less than 100 litres a second, or bone dry, or, as the chair says, nearly but not quite bone dry, whichever is correct. I'm sure both are correct. We can see that we are seeing some improvements here. We're seeing some signs of improvement. So in terms of moving forward, what are we looking for? We're looking for less peaks of the blue. We're looking for less troughs in the black. And we're looking for more consistent greens above the line all at the same time. Does that make sense? Yes? Jamie's nodding. Yay.
So QMCI, is that sort of like number of 80 or 90 or something, or?
It gives you a number, yep. So the MCI was the way that it was done for a while, which was a more qualitative measure of ecosystem health. And this is being quantitative so that you can compare one reach or one river to another. It's a good way of having a single metric. There's no good single metric, but it's a good way of getting to a single metric. Yep, and it's been happening now for a while, which is good, so we can look at it over a period of time also. All right, second example. The Windermere Drain, such a long list of parties who have been involved in turning this into what is becoming, I think, the poster child for the Heke Hines Plains. And the reasons for that are that, again, if we look at the blue line compared with the purple dots, you can see we have been historically below the maximum target, the 95 percentile target, quite a lot of the time, and that's due to Iwhatūna irrigation scheme pumping the deep groundwater in, the low nutrient deep groundwater in, and then taking most of it, but not all of it out for irrigation. So in the irrigation seasons, we're seeing the blue go down nice and low, and the hotter the year, the more irrigation water, therefore the lower the nutrients while retaining flow. So that's really helped with the system. If we move to the rightmost end of the blue graph, and above that the word the ETSA, so all that the Trust are doing now is funding Iwhatūna to continue pumping into the Windermere Drain as appropriate to maintain flow in the drain, which has the added benefit of low nutrients through the winter season. And so what that has meant is that we are now on 10 months in a row below the 2035 target. So we are essentially, we're on track, if you like, to meeting our first 2035 target for the catchment. And that's really encouraging. The second part of it is making sure, again, that the black line doesn't get too low. And on the right-hand side now, we're talking in litres per second. And so 10 litres a second in the Windermere Drain is not going to be great for the trout that are living in there. Although all the wonderful work that's been going on for the pools and riffles there, they will have somewhere to hide. And with the characters now really growing over, as you can see, if you haven't been down there, there will be hiding places for them to keep cool when the flows are lower. But if we can also boost flows during those particularly low periods, then we will have it made. I don't have any QMCI data on this, but the alternative is to go and have a slow walk down the drain and see the healthy fish in there, Ian.
ECAN has QMCI data for the Windermere, but it's taken lower down the Windermere where probably the QMCI is poorer than it is actually where you've got these photographs. And so it gives a slightly distorted impression of what's going on. And I think the only other comment to make about the Windermere is that it seems to be on the edge of where you get a benefit from the Hines. So some of the feeder drains at the top of the Windermere come across from the Hines River, and so when you were doing near river recharge in the lower reaches of the Hines, there was no question that those drains were putting water into the Windermere, whereas the home paddock drain gets no water from the Hines River, which is the next one over.
Yes. And because the Hines River sits high, it's not incised in because it's just running over the plains essentially when the groundwater in the plains are low and the Hines River is flowing. The water wants to flow sideways out and fill in that groundwater that then feeds the springs. So that absolutely...
and all these drains on the north side of the Hines have been badly affected by the District Council under instructions from ECAN closing down the stockwater races. They used to have, I think the Windermere had 6 stockwater races that used to tail off into the Windermere. Parakanoi was more like 10, I think.
Brent, we're going to have to keep moving.
We're just about there.
Good.
I think this is the last graph. And then there's a couple of pictures and we'll get to the question about Tynwald. So, this is our challenging waterway, gone from the poster child to only just up the road, and to quite a challenging one. So the nitrate, the water quality now is in orange, and you can see it sitting mostly above the line. There are gaps in the data where it was bone dry, and so there was no reading to take. The black I've dotted out also just so that you can see where there was no flow at all happening. And the green crosses are sitting pretty low. And so this hasn't got the recharge from the water races. This hasn't got the irrigation scheme TSA happening. This doesn't have the other assistance. And so our question, and it sits just below the Tynwald Plume area also, is still what can we do to help this drain up, to bring some life back into it as well. So that led to the last part of this presentation.
Can I just ask you one quick
Yes.
question? There's actually 3 people around here that are all on the Parakanoi.
Oh, yeah.
Why did you choose March as a date?
Sorry, so the data is continuous, and it started in March 17, went to March 24, because that's the data set we've got. In presenting this sort of data, it's you can't have too many dates across the bottom because otherwise people won't see it. So this is just showing that the data started in a March and finished actually in June of this year. But that's just what's sitting on the axis. Yep. So there's no bias towards March at all. Yep.
Just, I think it's worth putting the Parakanoi into a bit of context. It used to be the Shepherd's Brook, which comes from out of the upper Lagmore swamp, was the headwaters of the Parakanoi, used to flow down through Winslow effectively into the Parakanoi, and it's the only waterway other than the Hines itself that was named by Mana Whenua in the old Long Beach swamp. And so it was always has been historically a proper stream, but it's been absolutely destroyed by shutting the stockwater race system down.
All right, so this is our last piece of work to put on the table, and this follows on from previous studies and investigations that the Zone Committee will have heard over the years, and most recently from Philippa Aitchison Earle and Mike Stewart and others. And so that was referred to as the Tynwald Plume back then. The monitoring data that we've got going back into, at least the 1980s shows that this area has been challenging in terms of the nitrate concentrations. Philippa and Mike found that fertiliser use combined with groundwater irrigation heading on down the catchment, where the nitrate in the groundwater irrigation wasn't factored into fertiliser decisions, were most likely contributing to the snowballing effect of increasing nitrate on down the catchment. The blue pug, as it is known by some, the marine sediments, which is on the left-hand side, sitting underneath the heavy soils on the left-hand side in blue, have been known for some time to be a potential challenge also. But exactly what's going on within this plume has been a little bit of a mystery. So we have done two things. We have been monitoring quite a lot of bores. So our first site, the pilot site, up top left of the picture, you might see MAR 01 up there. So we've had a lot of monitoring down gradient from that to try and understand where that water is going for a while. And then secondly, we've had two continuous nitrate sensors sitting in what we thought was potentially west of the Tynwald plume, but we'd been seeing the levels, nitrate levels, go up and down more than we thought we should see. So we've had them sitting in there for a year, and it's yielded some really interesting results. The first thing is that and so I've just added in one, so the red on the right one is above 11.3, so above the drinking water limit. On the left, if it's red striped or all red, it is above the drinking water limit. Just wanted to differentiate between the 1 to 1.5 times and the 1.5 to 2 times the drinking water limit, essentially. So if you compare the two, you will see that there is more red in the left-hand one. In other words, at that single monitoring of last summer, the nutrient levels were in general higher than the maximum of all monitoring between 1990 and 2017. So it seems to be, from that one sample, worse than it had been. The kicker came when we were granted access to a number of groundwater pumping records over the last summer. And when we had our first year of monitoring data from our two nitrate sensors. So the blue line, if you like, the blue monitoring points equate to the blue bore on the left, the 35 metre bore, and the green points on the right relate to the green bore on the left, a little bit deeper down at 54 metres. In the winter time, we can see that these bores were below the drinking water limit, around about half or a little bit more than the drinking water limit. As soon as the groundwater pumping turned on, we could see the nitrates jump up, and with the blue one you can see it doubled, and the green one over the summer season the nitrates more than doubled. So the people in this area who may have had a nitrate test in the winter time and thought they were okay, and then we went and did our summer test and told them you're way over the drinking water limit. The scientists suggest this is really unsafe for you. Got a shock, and they did, when we did this test and we went back to them. And there were some quite concerned people in this area. When the pumping turned off, you could see the nitrate went down again quite quickly. So what we have concluded is that the water coming towards the marine sediments in Tynwald is kind of getting stuck, wants to carry on out to sea, but it's getting stuck because that blue pug is really squishy and doesn't take much water, so it's sitting there. The cumulative effects of the groundwater pumping, so this is not one or two groundwater irrigators, this is cumulative effects across that part of the plains, which is below the MH, where MHV can deliver surface water to. Cumulatively, that's lowering the groundwater table, and this water suddenly has somewhere to go, and so the groundwater is moving sideways. And this is really unusual in alluvial plains because normally the water goes down towards the sea. This data is pretty clear to us. We have no other reason to believe that it's not moving sideways. We have some other bores nearby, so these are the other coloured bores where we have regular monitoring. And that's the last graph. So for the 4 bores, so that's the blue and green that I showed you before, plus the red and yellow, between Windsor Westfield and Lills Road in this particular area, that's the graph at the top. So all of those nitrates go up quite significantly during the irrigation season and then back down again during the winter. Either side of that edge, so the brown one is a shallow bore in the tin-walled plume, which is why it's so high. A deeper bore in the tin-walled plume is that dark blue one at the bottom, so around the drinking water limit. And then the orange and mid-blue one across to the left. You can see that there is some movement, sometimes seasonal movement, but not much. So our conclusion is that the tin-walled plume moves across into this area, nearly getting to Winslow Westerfield Road across the summertime before moving back towards Turnwald in the winter time. So this is new. We have talked to all the people who we've taken samples from, but there are others that we probably didn't get samples from. And so I think I've talked about the challenges. Yes, so old water, so the water slows down. This is not something which is going to change in a hurry, so we're talking decades for the water to get down here, but then it can move quite quickly. Certainly cumulative rather than individual effects from pumping. There are other biological changes in around here, and we see this in other parts of the catchment too, where we're changing to the heavy soils, which I don't need to go into. Both New Zealand Drinking Water Standards and World Health Organisation have had a look at their 11.3 number and have confirmed that in the last few years. So therefore the sort of the chatter about lower limits and things like that, we can have confidence in these organisations. But we're seeing levels which are above the drinking water limit, these limits, and in some cases well above. So there are a number of things that we think need to be done, accelerated, supported, encouraged, everything we can do. And so the irrigation nutrient recycling in the upgrading catchment is for groundwater users, monitoring their nitrate and incorporating that into their fertiliser decisions. Continue communications with the locals and support for them. Essentially, the solution at the moment is under sink treatment. Because this is old water, there's no quick fix to this, but under sink treatment, as long as you maintain the under sink treatment, replace the cartridges, etc., does work. We're confident that the water from the pilot site is sort of heading down that boundary, the Winslow Westerfield Road boundary. And in the wintertime, we can see that it's having an effect on the bore users, the nitrate and bore users around Winslow, and they have reported to us they believe their nitrate concentrations are lower since we started up. So increasing that volume will help, but not solve it. Ian's talked about the water races, the stock water races. We have in the district, through the council decision, the long-term plan, consideration of multi-use water races on the table now. Obviously, there's lots of ecological benefits, not just for the bees drinking, but for lots of other reasons to keep some water races alive. And so to keep these settlements and to understand where this water's going when it's recharged and all those sorts of things, keep that on the table during the process, we believe is really important. And then there's bringing some of the learnings from the Windermere system into the Parakanoi system as well. Richard, does this answer any of the earlier questions you had on this? Yep. Any further questions, acknowledging the time? No? Yes?
Yeah, it's sort of somewhat different to what I was sort of led to believe was the problem, given quite a few years ago, one of the ECAN scientists was doing a paper on it and sort of concluding that there was other things there. What sort of, not DNA, testing have you been able to do, carbon dating have you been able to do the source of the nitrate? Is it actually coming from agriculture? Is it coming from septic tanks? Is it coming from lots of other things?
So that was part of Philippa's study as well. They were looking at it, and there was also a single discharge point from the stockyards. And so we know those nutrients went down, right? They went down into the same sort of system, exactly where they were. It was hard to pull apart. So the isotopic analysis that was done as part of the Philippa's and Mike Stewart's study pinpointed the markings of fertiliser as the majority of the nutrients, and if I very briefly go back to this one, you can see on the left graph, sort of below the MAR02 thing, there's high levels of nitrate just below Legmore there, and so there's no stockyard up there. There's low intensity farming right around that area. There's a few septic tanks right around there, but not very many, not like there are down at Tynwald. So we have seen the nutrients come down into this area. So it's undoubted that there were some localised effects, but not the majority effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, shall I? Sorry, Ange.
Sorry, just quickly. I know quite a few of the things that you're talking about and focusing on in HH Wet coincides with some of the targets and aspirations within the piece of work that the District Council have done with our natural place. So as we look at implementing in particular some of the short-term goals or opportunities within here, are you guys aligning with that overarching district-wide piece of work?
Very keen to.
So, Brent, you're over time.
Here's the last slide. Yes, we're done.
Okay. So, because we just want to, it's obviously, it's a huge bit of work and amazing details, especially since we've seen it materialise over the years, from where you start to where you are. Now, so I suppose the next important thing for us is the next steps, isn't it?
Yes.
So, do you want to run over the key ones here?
Sure.
It's the hearing, obviously, but you can't tell us much about that, or can you?
So we're waiting for a date.
Right.
Yep. So that will be known publicly as soon as we know it publicly. So it's really important that this process concludes. It's really important that we can get on and do our job. The evidence very clearly shows where these targeted enhancements are happening, that they are having the benefit across the whole ecosystem health spectrum. We know that if the on-farm does its job and nothing else happens, that we will have less of a water quality problem, but we will have more of a water quantity problem. And therefore we won't have an ecosystem health gain. So we can't just do one. So we know that if we stop doing what we're doing, a leg of the stool will not be held up, and we will not get improved ecosystem health. We're very confident that the evidence backs that up. So we're moving ahead very quickly. The eClean Bioreactor has been it's an 18-month project to date. It is now days away from operating. The intake was connected this last week. We're just waiting for the discharge to be connected and then for it to warm up a bit so the bacteria can wake up from their winter slumber, start doing their job. So we should have some results from that. Constructed wetlands, both down at your place, Bill, and others. We're hoping to see what PC8 holds in terms of constructed wetland rule changes, but also keep that moving. Irrigation nutrient recycling trial will be starting, so this is on Campbell Tate's property, as soon as he starts irrigating and the like, so very soon. And then everything else really is ongoing. We know what we're doing is working, and so all those will carry on.
That's great. So any questions for Brett? Richard?
Just to give the community an idea, so it's quite a big investment the community is making, and most of the money appears to be going into hearings and consents. Would you concur with that? So on one hand, we're putting money into the community, and we pay our rates to ECAN. So I think people need to understand that there's a lot of money going around in a circle here. So hopefully we get an outcome that factors in everybody in the community's views, not just one sector's views, because it's a big, very big investment for our community down here.
Yes.
It's a message to ECAN, effectively.
Look, Richard, I've been trying to give that message to ECAN that it's disgraceful, the consenting process for the MAR project. And if you take the subset of the eClean trial, it's 18 months trying to get a consent to put 1.5 litres a second through the
Yes, 1 point.
eClean thing. It just seems...
2.5.
And I imagine the cost of the consent will be 10 times the value of any of the environmental benefit from what you get out of it. So it's not good.
So, Sydney, have you got a quick question?
Oh, just a very quick question. It's about the costs as well, cost benefit. Brett, have you done have you added up all those projects all together or individually to see which one would be like you explained, it's a combination of all these measures that's going to make a difference, but have you done a cost benefit analysis of individual projects and see which one is shows us the best benefit for the money?
Great question, thank you. So, yes, we have with the information available, and as we update it, we update our estimates. So, while we think there's going to be, or we're confident there's going to be a combination required, we want to find the lowest environmental and economic cost solution for this region. So there is a formal project that Lee Burberry from Dairy NZ and myself on behalf of HH Wet are going through over the next couple of years, where we are looking across the whole spectrum of these sorts of enhancements. Lee has already done some costings to date, and I've done some preliminary costings based on what we've got from our trials, but we really need to be operating at scale so that we know what our true costs are, otherwise we're guessing. So the answer is yep, yes, thank you, great question, and in a couple of years hopefully we'll be back with a much clearer answer.
Well, I think we can go back to 2018 or something when this was slowly recommended that this sort of takes off, and it's grown. You've done a tremendous job, and it'd just be a great shame to be held up in the consenting process and costs and all that, which, you know, when we're looking for tools to try and help these nitrate problems and everything, and there's one just staring us in the face, and yet we've run into a bit of a brick wall, but let's hope everything goes well. So thank you, Brett, very much for your presentation. It's as thorough as ever, and you've got so much data there now, it's amazing. And Fleur, thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
So I think we just need to receive that report, Jamie, and we've provided a bit of feedback. Hopefully you had a few reasonable questions. So I just move that the Zone Committee receive this presentation from HH Wet and appreciate the effort that's gone into it and the success of it, and seconded by Ange. All in favour? Aye. Carried, pass. Thank you. Okay, Jamie, how quick can you be?
No question.
That one there. So this will be the highlights reel of the committee update. So I'll just talk to the items that need a decision or whatnot. Thank you. So point one, the Zone Committee Action Plan 2021 to 2024. As you know, it was the intention was for it to finish at the end of the financial year in June. But given the uncertainty of the Zone Committee review, like, well, I guess what's happening in that space, we've made the recommendation that Zone Committees just keep calm and carry on with the current 2021-24 action plan. So I just wanted the Zone Committee to confirm that they are happy with that, basically because the Zone Committee action plan budget projects are kind of dependent on how they align with an action plan. So is everyone happy to carry on with the current version that we have?
Is that the action plan that includes recreation in the lakes?
Yes. Yep.
So the action plan is
Yeah.
really becoming relevant, but I think we'll just carry on, won't we?
Can I just add to it, and the reason I asked Brett and Fleur before, so again, this piece of work that's been undertaken by the community, there's so much of the projects and what we're talking about reflected within this document, and it supports a lot of the work that's already gone into the action plan. So while we're not necessarily reviewing and refreshing that, this does complement where we're going with some of the, and especially the short-term priorities.
What is
So-
that?
So that's the Ashburton District Council Biodiversity Strategy. I think it was
Okay.
launched in May, and the input from stakeholders across the board has been really comprehensive.
That's
So I think we should, as a zone committee, recognise that and say, whilst we haven't had an official review, there's a lot of thought gone into what this document looks like for our district. And I just note at the beginning of it, Mayor Neil Brown talks about the significant, the integral part that Runaka have had in it. So it's almost helped us as having a review via, not saying that it's going to take the place of it, but it's been useful in the meantime, keeping us on track.
Okay. So in answer to your question, Jamie, I think we'll just carry on as under the action plan we've got. Yep.
Okay, thanks. And so I guess segueing into point 6, which was around the Zone Committee Action Plan budget. So I've got there, and we're now accepting applications until the 13th of September. We've had a bit of a delay with getting the advertisements out, so it's been recommended that the date be extended out until the 4th of October. And I guess the reason I was aiming for the 13th of September was because I was going to be away, so then we'd have everything teed up on the 24th of September before I fly off into the sunset that evening. But Dave Moore, the former facilitator, has graciously agreed to run a session in October on the 22nd, and Carol had amazing foresight to already have a calendar invite sent out for that date. I don't think we had a...
She's amazing.
Yeah, so thank you.
Still with us.
So hopefully that I guess it probably works well for community groups, unless you were wanting a decision earlier.
I thought you were going to say you put off your holiday to see.
Oh, no. But I guess there's two approaches you could take, and I noted it to Chris and Bill. If you did want to consider applications, you could consider some in September and also October. But I guess the whole point of having the advertising period was for the committee to be able to kind of compare the different projects. So I would still recommend, reviewing all the applications in October, which frees up some capacity for that September meeting.
Yep.
Which we kind of have some ideas on already.
Okay.
Yeah. So are there any questions or any grumbles about that one?
Well, it is what it is, so October will be. Yep.
So you'll have your
22nd.
old friend Dave back as well. And then just 8, noting the actions. Sorry, for number 3, I'll need to chase that one up again. That relates to the Green Street emergency powers. And number 5 is underway, isn't it, Councillor McKenzie? Action number 5, checking if Environment Canterbury has an archivist. It's underway.
Yeah, I've had to grovel to Jamie and apologise profusely for not having asked the question which I was meant to ask.
Okay, we won't record that in the minutes. Anything grovelling, but we'll get it sorted. So Ian's got another month. That's fine. Thanks, Ian.
And then, so just for number 9, just to be clear, the 24th of September meeting / workshop, we'll update that once we've got an agenda together, and then for that October, where it says no meeting workshop, it'll be October the 22nd for a meeting.
Well, I know it's not suiting you, but if we're only doing a few applications in October, we might do the September workshop in October as well. Whether depends. We might only be discussing 3 projects for October, might we?
Well, at the moment, there's about that many, but I anticipate a bit of a flurry closer to the closing date, which tends to happen is people scurry to get their applications in.
Okay. Well, we'll work on that as it goes, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can,
All right.
Good on
Is
that
there any other further business that anyone would like to bring up? Christopher.
Well, I didn't want you to wrap it up too soon. For our next meeting, I've been talking to Jamie, I was wondering, Ashburton Lyndhurst irrigation scheme, there was a quote made by the hearing commissioner saying that the Harpur is degraded or in a degraded state. And it's something that's quite new to me, So I was wondering if we could ask ECAN scientists to come and talk to us as to what are the attributes that make up a degraded water state, why have they come to that conclusion, help us understand it as a zone committee that down there it is degraded or it's not degraded, I don't know. So it was, if we can ask a scientist to come along and talk to that. That was one thing, and the other one I was wondering if we can ask ECAN science team if they can come and talk to us about what science they're doing up in the Ashburton Lakes around Lake Kemp area in that vicinity, so give us a bit of a understanding of what science they're actually doing and what are the gaps in that, and is what recordings they're doing around water, and would that be helpful for an application if the district council were going down that pathway. I was just wondering if those are a couple of things that we could ask the science team to talk to us. Were you in
Sounds
agreement?
good. Yep, it's Tim Davey, is it?
Just leave it to Jamie.
Yes, I'll
Okay, no, they're
Get on
good
to that one.
points about the Ashburton, it's a bit of science on the Ashburton River. Hapu, yep, that's good, Chris, we can do that. Anyone else?
Can I just give a quick update? We had our Rakaia Enhancement meeting, society meeting last week. So I had hoped to give a bit of a summary as correspondence in. It's quite a significant piece of work that's been happening for over a long period of time, and the applications, it's now oversubscribed, but that said, there was 2 significant agency applications. When I asked for a mapping of the projects that had happened to date, so therefore a cumulative effect of the funding, that wasn't available at that time, but I think given such a significant part of our district, it would be good to kind of see what is going on up there across the board and how that money's being spent. One of my other suggestions is that when they talk about the fact that the landowners are in support, it would be helpful to get a letter of support from landowners or land care groups around it. Often I find people say, yes, the landowner's happy and tick that box, but the landowners are like, well, I'm not sure who's spoken to us about it. So there's a couple of opportunities for quite a visionary strategic approach up there. There's a heck of a lot going on, and my concern is how much of it's coordinated and is there strategic prioritisation up there. So this isn't a full update, it's just kind of given me a bit of a dip my toe in the water, and I just want to last comment, came back from the facilitator. Special thanks and welcome to our new member Angela, who hit the ground running with amazing pre-meeting prep and thoughtful comments straight off the bat. So I might have gone in a bit hot, but such a great opportunity when you've got that funding to really make a difference on the ground, and our role as zone committee on that to make sure that everybody's doing their bit collaboratively, I think is an important one. So to that point, it may be helpful to get maybe the Whitcomb Land Care Group to come and present to us at some stage. I think all the rest of the other catchment groups have, and it would be nice to get Whitcomb, maybe Paul Ensor or their facilitator or whoever's available to come and talk to us about what that looks like from their perspective, so we can get an on the ground sense of where things are at.
That's a good idea. No, that'd be good to get them along, so we could do that. Anything else, Jamie?
Do you want to just
No,
mention
well-
that one across? Or
Yeah, just what we might do, in the back of your zone committee report and agenda 10.1, there's just a report about some of the projects and the funding, the traps and everything. So we might just put that into next month's agenda as well, so we can just read it properly and appreciate what's happened, but we're sort of out of time. And there's a bit of work gone into that, so we'll do that properly. So if that's all, I'll ask Jamie, can you do
receive and then confirm the action plan.
Oh, okay. So we've decided to carry on with the action plan for 2021 to 24 until we hear otherwise. So I'll just move that we operate under the Canterbury Water Management Strategy Action Plan 2024. Seconded for that. Christopher, all in favour? Aye. Carried, thank you. Oh, yeah, toughness. Okay, Jamie, can you do the karakia, please?
Ko toa mai ki te mesunga o te hui nei, nā reira mi ingoa tātou. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a i hukuraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, ake, 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 āmini.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.